Tiens, on a découpé une femme en morceaux rue de la bienséance à 2 pas du chat. Tiens, on a découpé une...
I am a feminist.
Je vous obsède avec une constance
je ne suis pas conduit
qui appelle quand même l'admiration.
D'une façon conforme à ce qu'on attend d'une jeune fille d'abord et d'une femme ensuite.
I'm sorry that I didn't become the world's first black classic pianist.
Donald Trump.
Je crois qu'une femme qui existe dans son temps, à l'intérieur de son temps, n'a pas d'époque, elle marque son époque.
Welcome to La Poudre, an intimate, in-depth conversation with inspiring women. They are artists or activists. They are creative. They're powerful. How did they become women? What books did they read? What fights did they fight? What do they scream? What do they dream? I am Lorraine Bastide, and today my guest is Amandine Gay.
I'm going to do a happening in Lauren Bastide's podcast by taking my clothes off.
I met Amandine Gay on YouTube through an extract of her movie, Speak Up. It was a close-up with natural lighting of a young woman talking about her childhood. She said, I used to think growing up meant becoming white and therefore pretty. Speak Up is Amandine Gay's first movie, in which French and Belgian black women narrate their own experience. Her approach touches me all the more that it is very similar to mine with La Poudre. On a December night in a movie theater in Saint-Denis, near Paris, I attended one of the very first screenings of Speak Up. It was the first time I saw an audience applauding during a movie, and on numerous occasions. Amandine Gay's work is filling an abyssal void. It's an answer to the invisibilization of black women in our medias, in our society. Amandine Gay produced this movie by herself thanks to a crowdfunding. When she had to fight for a national release in France, she did it on her own too. Speak Up will soon be released in the movie theaters in the US, and that's a huge victory. With Amandine Gay, we talked about adoption, joy, and Canadian squirrels. Amandine Gay, vous êtes cinéaste. Amandine Gay, you are a filmmaker, an essayist, an activist, and one of the leading figures of Afrofeminism in France. Your reflection on intersectionality is very elaborate, and as a journalist, I feel the urge to interview you as an expert to ask you about the specific discriminations black women suffer from in our society. But you already answered those questions. Speak Up allows us to listen and to watch to 24 black women speaking up about their own experiences. They live in France or Belgium, and they describe the way racism keeps manifesting itself at every step of their lives from their childhood. In their love life, in their psychological life, in their cultural life, and their professional life. I, however, still have one question we'll try to answer today. How does one become the filmmaker who directed this movie? Is watching your movie the first step to understanding who you are?
Well, yes, of course. The movie says a lot about me as well, since its storyline is an interview based on my life. The idea was to start from the day you discover that you're black, what it means in a political sense for your social construction, up until the day you decide or not to leave France, which is my case since I left for Canada a year and a half ago. And in the middle of that, I added all the stuff that are linked to my personal path because I wanted to see if my own experience could enter into a dialogue with other black girls' experiences. Since I'm adopted and grew up in a white family who lived in the countryside in Lyon, there was a whole aspect of my life that left me wondering if I could find an echo in the lives of girls who really grew up in Afro communities.
So you grew up in the countryside near Lyon. What was it like to grow up there?
Well, it was interesting. There were different aspects. The countryside is great. I'm very happy I grew up in a village where there were cows. When I was little, there was even still a farm where we could go buy our cheese and everything. On a lot of levels, it was great. Like, for instance, having the liberty to go run in the next door field. I had a great feeling of liberty as a child. Being able to go wherever I wanted must have influenced a lot of what followed. So I went to preschool in my village, a stage of life when children haven't necessarily thematized things. It was great until I had to change school for my last year of primary school because my mother was a teacher and she was transferred to the village next door. I left with her. And from that time, it was something else because children in elementary school are starting to get much more articulate. So the beginning of the movie is based on my experience, on the moment when, in kindergarten section, someone told me, "I won't hold hands with you, you're black." Which was a double catastrophic moment. First, I discovered I was black. And second, it was apparently serious enough for someone to refuse holding my hand, which, when you're 5, is an absolute drama. But then I was lucky enough to have my father's best friend's son come to me and hold my hand. That's the kind of thing that saves you from being destroyed by some events. From that moment, it never stopped. From the moment I became conscious I was black by this very violent thing called rejection, it never stopped. It formulated itself through various aspects. Friends whose parents vote for the Front National and don't see the problem in telling you, sugarcoating it by saying, "But you're not the same. We like you." Professors who expect you to be a bad student, who are outraged by the fact that you are not. I left primary school hearing a teacher telling me, "You're going to get crushed in high school." So yeah, it kind of kept going on.
How did your parents address to you when you were a kid? What language did they use?
Déjà, moi, j'ai grandi dans une famille qui est relativement atypique, on va dire, puisque...
I grew up in a rather atypical family since my mom was the one earning the most money, who had more diplomas. My mother was someone who never wore makeup, who had a very alternative approach to gender, even if she would never express it that way. I understood later on that having a family where everyone does their chores, my father, my brother, wasn't quote-unquote the norm.
En pensant que ça c'était la normalité entre guillemets, c'est plus tard que j'ai découvert qu'en fait la plupart.
Later in life, I discovered that most families had stayed at the stage where men don't do anything and earn more money than their wives.
Un parcours plus prestigieux et qui gagnait plus d'argent. Donc ça c'est.
It imprinted on me the image of a powerful woman as something normal.
C'est normal qu'une femme soit puissante quoi entre guillemets. Donc ça a été un premier enjeu.
Nobody ever spoke to me in a way you would usually speak to a child, which is something I don't understand. I mean, children are just people under construction with less experience. There is no need to talk to them like they can't understand anything. The fact that my mother was a very busy teacher made me learn autonomy at a young age. We would work together. She would grade papers while I was doing my homework.
On travaillait en même temps, quoi. Elle corrigeait les copies, moi je faisais mes devoirs à côté. Et puis après...
Then came basketball. I played a lot. I could do whatever I wanted as long as my grades were good. That was the contract between me and my parents. It allowed me to have a lot of freedom, go to my friends a lot. Soon I went to basketball camp. I was very close to a family whose father was an African-American basketball player. I saw him at least once a week. We went away on vacations often. In my family, children were people who were handed tools so that they could spread their wings.
Les enfants, c'est des personnes qui on donne des outils pour qu'ils prennent leur envol, quoi.
The world quickly opened up to you.
Ouais. Et je pense que ça, c'était quand même aussi pas mal thématisé pour...
And that was a lot of my mom's doing. It's true that I talk a lot about her, and less about my father who passed away in 2015. She was the one making decisions when it came to that type of thing. For instance, she was really conscious that I was black, and I was very lucky about that. My mother and her older sister took a trip to Guadeloupe in the 70s. through a Presbyterian exchange program.
Donc, elles ont fait cette expérience
That allowed them to experience reverse alterity, being the white girls whose hair people wanted to touch, whose very pale skins are the whole village's attraction.
Et donc, du coup, dans ce voyage-là,
On that trip, they met a black man who became a deacon in Lyon, a friend of the family. And that allowed me to attend the masses held by the Caribbean community in Lyon.
Caribéenne dans la région lyonnaise. Et puis, c'est vrai que ma mère était très ouverte à faire ce qui m'intéressait.
My mother was very open to stuff that is now asked during an adoption process if you are white persons adopting a black child. Is there someone that could become an Afro-descendant reference in your family circle?
Dans les années 70, 80, parce qu'il y avait mon frère avant moi. Et donc, c'est vrai que j'ai été beaucoup encouragée.
I was encouraged to go wherever I wanted to, and I wanted to hang out with black people, but also play music and sports. The whole cultural and sporty stimulation was very important to me.
Ouais, de stimulation culturelle, sportive, ça c'était très important chez moi.
I spent a lot of time reading your blog, and I found a very moving post you wrote shortly after your father passed away. You say, way before new dads were a trend, he took care of us.
Ouais.
Yes. My father was a road mender, so he would sweep up the streets and have his afternoons all to himself. He was the one who took care of us, especially during our early childhood. He would come pick us up at the nannies and look after us for the whole afternoon. I thought it was quite common and discovered later on that most men don't take care of their children that much. Yeah, I have very happy childhood memories with my father, who was there a lot. He played a lot with us. My father was very important to me, but more on a sentimental and emotional level. Whereas in my mother's case, it was more on a strategic educational level, like school and everything.
You describe a household with pretty progressive values. Your home was opened to the, I quote, strangeness and strangers. Did you inherit these values?
Oui, bah, complètement. Je pense que plus
Well, yeah, completely. I think the older you get, the more you realize what you took on from your parents. Sometimes with horror, but it also brought on some issues. Like, I remember my older brother bringing home people with mohawk haircuts. Like,
yeah, the 80s.
The 80s. And I was like relatively tetanized sitting at the table. But yeah, it's always been that way in our house. Very open.
Were you born a woman or did you rather become one?
Alors moi, je suis vraiment devenue femme. C'était pas du tout. C'était pas.
I became a woman. It wasn't glaring at all to me. It was a choice at some point of my life. I always point it out because I don't want people to think I've always been conscious of it. It came by late. I was in Australia, so I must have been 21, 22 years old. I read Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence by Adrienne Rich, as well as another book I like a lot, Keep Your Tongue Out of My Mouth, I'm Kissing You Goodbye, by Cynthia Highmouth. She recounts how, during the sexual revolution, she ended up in San Francisco and found herself trapped in a very patriarchal micro-community. We tend to forget that sexual liberation basically consisted of the emergence of communities where women had to get up super early, milk goats, do all the work, take care of the kids while men smoked joints and talked about the revolution. She was super in love with an artist, and the more she was working on developing his career, the more she felt depressed. They ended up divorcing. She needed the money, so she became a public letter writer, went back to university, and started writing a rather humorous chronicle in an American women's magazine. Can't remember which one. That work helped her realize that she had always been with men who represented what she wanted to be. And I realized it was my case too. I was in Australia, I started dating women, and it became clear to me that I had the tendency to date men who were, for instance, travelers, instead of just traveling myself. The second realization I came to by reading Adrienne Rich is the concept of internalized misogyny. Women who don't want to be reduced to the women category and everything that is attached to it. Like, for example, being soft, shy, held back, will have a tendency to identify with masculinity in their ambitions, their career choices, and therefore reject other women. I totally recognize myself in that. My sociability as a teenager was extremely masculine. I wore baggy pants. I could say things like, girls are boring, I don't like hanging out with them, I'd rather hang out with dudes because they're more straightforward. Australia allowed me to thematize and realize what that whole discourse was really about. It is always quite interesting to cut off ties with the different social backgrounds you come from. It's like having a wiped out slate on which you can start to rethink yourself. So, I was in a big questioning phase on my gender identity, on my sexual orientation, and from those readings, as well as various events, I started to take ownership of that female category. I realized that there is no need to be ashamed of a certain kind of fragility. That if I wanted to wear dresses and not get insulted for it in the streets needed to change, not me. And although not all codes of femininity interest me, I consider them as something we can play with. I take pleasure in wearing baggy pants and overalls, but I also love wearing my beautiful vintage dresses from the 50s with high heels and red lipstick. It took me some time, but I like this fluidity.
Are you implying that there is no such thing as a woman, but rather like many types of women?
Exactly, even in each of us.
Exactly. So today you do a lot of research about adoption, which is a very peculiar way to structure one's identity, as you put it.
Yes,
because I always have this outside-inside feeling. I love realizing through a book or a movie that somebody thought for 10 years about subjects that passed through me as well. And being like, yes, that's it. When I discovered the concept of Outsider Within by Patricia Hill Collins, for instance, I said to myself, that's what I have been trying to explain for years. The feeling of being like an outsider from the inside, knowing intimately what whiteness and the white world is, since it's the world I grew up in, and knowing just as much intimately what a black woman's experience consists of. It's hard because generally young people just want to belong, be in a norm. I always say only conventional people wish they could be eccentrics. My biggest wish as a young woman was to be like everybody else.
To fit in.
Yeah, that was my absolute dream. And there was a time when you tell yourself that will never happen. So do I spend my life telling myself, oh God, that will never happen, or do I find a way to reconcile all of it? I realized while working on adoption that there are a lot of common issues between adopted persons and people who grew up in multi-ethnic families. There is this eternal question, do I have to choose? What should we keep from our various heritage? I came to think that my negritude, or what makes me a black woman, is a construction, since it isn't linked to any form of heritage. It's something I had to construct myself.
Your readings made it grow. That's pretty much what you're telling me. It's really a cultural construction.
Yes, of course, as well as relationships. There was a whole group of people who allowed me to create a form of Afro-socialization, but it was something that came through my path and my choices. I wanted and needed it because I still question myself on that subject. Maybe in like 20 years it will have developed, but if I'm still alive. I needed to evaluate which parts of my identity I wanted to choose. I never chose to be a black woman. It was imposed on me. Maybe if it hadn't been enforced on me, I would have had other interests today. We'll never know. I think you can only take real interest in the social thematics which affect you the most. For example, I have a friend who was also adopted. She has Asian origins. She's disabled and a lesbian. The other day we were talking about the fact that the last thing she thematized was her Asian origins, because being disabled and a lesbian were issues that took over everything else. It is very interesting to realize that what becomes political is what poses you a challenge in society. In my case, my gender wasn't an issue in the family I grew up in. It wasn't standardized. Growing up, it didn't raise any further question for me. That's not how I define myself. If I qualify myself as a cisgender person sometimes, it is more as a reminder of my privileges in comparison with a transsexual person. But since it was never an issue for me, it is not a topic I chose to work on.
You talk about the role models you had to go look out for. You had to create your own Black socialization. You talk a lot about representation issues. Basically, when you were a child, the only Black figures you saw on television were Michael Jackson and Whoopi Goldberg. No French figures, obviously. How does never seeing anyone that looks like you in the media influence a childhood?
I think it's a subject that would deserve extensive studies. Since it was my case, I can't know for sure what would have come if things would have been different. What I will say is that it revolves around a question of pride and how much you allow yourself. Without even going so far as talking about television, when in every sphere of social life, the only persons who look like you are either cleaning up or behind a cash register, but never doctors or professors, it's difficult to imagine yourself becoming a professor. It's a real issue. I don't know if there is a huge hatch opening up at the end of university studies in which all the Blacks, Arabs, and women disappear. But the higher the degree of studies, the more obvious it gets. Today, we have reached a stage where there is a higher percentage of women holding PhDs. And yet, the higher you climb on the powerful positions ladder, the more you question yourself. Who are the full professors? Who are the department managers? Who are the university heads and chairs? What does it mean? Does it mean that every doctoral woman doesn't have the capacity to become a full professor? Or is there something blocking? To be able to formulate this statement, you have to already be a part of those circles. I'm not a big fan of Barbies, but as a kid, you could notice that the doctor or Barbie doll didn't exist. That's what Rebecca is talking about in the excerpt. When she says the Black Barbie doesn't have an occupation, it's significant.
Rebecca is one of the women interviewed in Speak Up.
Yes. When she pointed it out, I told myself there's this whole issue of what we actually will become. To me, it all comes down to this. What is our role? It sends the message that we don't have one, that we are not destined to become astronauts. I spoke a lot about Fatoumata Kebe, who's finally a doctor in astronomy, because to me,
that TEDx talk is extraordinary. People should really check it out because she talks about waste in space. It's amazing.
It's fascinating. And to me, that's the future. She also opened an association to encourage young racialized girls to build themselves careers, or at least start studying science. And it all comes down to this, in being able to say, well, look, there is a Fatoumata, and therefore saying to young girls, look, it is possible. It's all about opening the world of possibilities. And when you grow up in a country in which you are never portrayed, the world of possibilities is very, very limited. And it shows in the country's career choices. The medico-social sciences fields are filled with young Black and Arab women. That raises a lot of questions. Did these young women ever consider for a second that they could do something else? Do the professors who teach them ask themselves if they could have chosen something else? I'm not sure. And that's the saddest part of it. They don't even picture themselves doing anything else.
You studied at Sciences Po in Lyon, one of the best political science schools in France. You were 18 years old. What were your dreams at that time?
I wanted to be a journalist, but I was still divided between being a journalist or a lawyer. Then when I saw the books of thousands of pages you had to learn by heart in order to become a lawyer, I quickly decided to become a journalist.
Et puis je pense, ouais, j'étais jeune.
I was 17 at the time, so I still had that very naive image of journalism as international reporters who went on adventures, and also the whole literary aspect of writing. But quickly, school principals came to Sciences Po and explained what it consisted of, and that was the end of it for me. They came up to us saying, no, but journalism is not about that anymore. You should stop with this romantic and naive visions of it. The first thing journalism is about is do what your chief editor tells you to do, and then be close to the French people's topics of interest. I asked myself, but who decides what French people want and have an interest in? In addition to that, I have a tiny problem with authority, especially when I consider it unfair. I told myself, well, okay, that's not for me at all. I couldn't picture myself in an open space writing papers that someone had told me to write. That wasn't what I wanted to do at all. So I redirected myself towards documentary film, telling myself that it was a sector that would allow me to take my time to work on my subjects. Journalism today is all about sticking to topicality, producing super rapidly. Apart from spaces like Mediapart, investigative journalism is underdeveloped in France. In the US, there is still space for background work. In France, you better hold on. Without Mediapart, there wouldn't be anything left. That raised a lot of questioning in me. So I just decided it wasn't for me. Started digging around documentary filming, thinking there would be time to do some research. The whole preliminary preparation of a movie or research work may be my favorite thing.
You like long form.
Well, yes, because very often it is what allows you to let your thinking evolve. I realized that what I love is this movement, which is one of the reasons I have trouble with authority or integrating a political movement. I tried doing it with Oser le féminisme, but a group means a guideline to which you must comply. I am someone who changes her mind a lot, not because I'm a flip-flopping person, but because after testing and experiencing something that seemed true to me 3 years ago, I come to realize that I was wrong. What I love is having an idea and testing it out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. In research, you begin from a first hypothesis, then you do your work, and only after that it is validated or not. Instead of creating preconceived models, which to me is uninteresting. It is true that we also need theoretical models. For instance, in the case of intersectionality that I discovered through Patricia Hill Collins, and was invented by Kimberly Crenshaw. But I realized that my operating mode is more about testing those models, push them to their edges, see how we can modify them, adapt them to different contexts. And right now I can tell you, I have no idea what we were talking about in the first place.
You were talking about being 17 in Sciences Po and giving up on journalism.
All right. So, I was a year away from graduating from Sciences Po, and I decided to do my fourth and last year of studies in Australia. My graduation dissertation was on the challenges of the colonial issue, so I wanted to go somewhere where there was a university department linked to its subject. In Australia, they had one dedicated to Aboriginal studies. I chose a university where an actual Aboriginal woman was teaching, which was kind of a big deal. In my head, it wasn't articulated that way. But I think it was really about reappropriating the narrative, openly confronting with our colonial history. The fact that an Aboriginal woman came to teach there was really something else. It was a great year. For instance, she made a very famous Aboriginal actor come tell us about his whole experience. I started to branch off towards cinema. So I also added a quarter of cinema studies, and they made us produce a short movie as a shared assignment. We had editing and writing courses, all that. It ascertained to me that I liked it. I had the best grade in scenario writing. I realized that it was my thing, but I also became aware of my limits. For instance, I should never be the camera operator. Ever. But editing and writing is my thing.
And directing as well. The photography in Speak Up is so beautiful.
Yes. But it's true that if some directors like to take on the camera, that is not my case. All of that led me to the end of Sciences Po. I was 21 years old, I think, and I was so tired. I was coming out of an entire life course obsessed by excellence.
Yeah, I was about to talk about it. Something like maybe a competitive spirit, being the first, being the
But
best.
yeah, that's it. Totally. A competitive spirit, a desire for revenge. I think it is common to a lot of racialized persons, to those who are not destroyed by systemic racism and sexism anyway. Having some sort of reverse life instinct, being all, I'm going to show you what I'm made of at first. And then it all comes back swinging in your face. It was my case at 21. I was in Sciences Po. I was still playing sports at a high performance, since I was part of a national basketball team. Sciences Po, high-performance sports, maintaining a civic engagement. I went from being a class representative to Sciences Po's student union office, where I was in charge of the cultural commission.
You just can't help it.
No, I can't help it. There was always this side of me overbidding on occupations, and I had to excel in everything in order to escape stereotypes. Step away from what was expected from me. I had that very clear sensation when I arrived in Australia. I knew exactly what I didn't want to do, but no idea what I did want to do. That was my conclusion. I had been fighting for years to escape stereotypes, and I couldn't even begin to say what I wanted to do, which was anything linked to the cultural scene, and just go for it. What kept me from going for it was, I think, the fact that I was way skinnier at that time, so that I was tall, beautiful, black girl. Everyone kept asking, are you a singer? Are you a dancer? It was very important for me to be able to reply, no, I study at Sciences Po, and I want to be a journalist, etc. And at some point I told myself, but it is true that I want to do some acting. So I had plenty of side jobs, but I ended up working at Lyon's auditorium, which was pretty awesome because it allowed me to attend a lot of concerts, work on music festivals during summer, plus it was really well paid. I had that desire for a long time, but I didn't dare to go for it.
Before we talk about becoming a comedian, I would like you to tell me about that moment when you turned 18 and you were finally allowed to consult your birth records, which were kept by the social services. How hard is it to go through such a procedure?
Well, it's not very complicated to get through the procedure because everyone wants to know. I mean,
does everyone do it?
Well, I don't know if everybody does it, nor at what moment of their lives they get to it, but in my case, it's different because I came to the world through anonymous childbirth. Hence the fact that I had to go check my birth records at the DAS, the French Department for Health and Social Security. In general, the desire to find out about your roots are triggered by the loss of an adopting parent, or becoming yourself a parent, or becoming an adult. Grief, maternity, all of those events linked to parentality is what brings people to start doing some research. But in the end, everyone has that curiosity. We simply ask ourselves, where do I come from? In my case, it happened at 18, when I was old enough to ask for my file to be opened.
Speaking of weariness you were feeling when you were 22, maybe it was all like the end of a cycle, or maybe the beginning?
Yes, I think it was really linked to that need for excellence. That can also be linked to abandonment, but to me, adoption is also about finding out what political issues you should thematize.
How do you hierarchize your different identities?
That wasn't really my first problem, actually. Maybe it was because I grew up in the countryside, which was attenuated by the fact that I met other black girls later on, but I had always thought my experience was linked to my adoption and growing up in a very isolated white environment. Then I discovered that some girls who had grown up in Afro communities, in big cities, had felt similar things. That fact kept adoption from being the first issue I needed to address. Now it interests me because I've started questioning myself about my own desire to have children. What does it mean? What do we pass on? Is it something that needs fixing? Working on it in an artistic and academic way, it finalizes the distance I needed to take away from it. At the end of that process, it's resolved. So let's say I just got out of my colonial questioning cycle, Afrofeminism, all that. They will always be issues which feed my work because they were my life's first challenges, but it is the movie which ends that cycle. It's a way to turn my back on it, a synthesis that brings an end to something that was very hurtful at some time, and that isn't anymore at all. It takes a certain amount of years to be able to produce a true political discourse on adoption, as well as an artistic work. The more intimate the subject, the more it takes time. Today, I am 32 years old, and I am sure this is not the type of work I could have done 10 years ago.
So you were talking about expressing yourself through art. Did you start exploring this when you turned to comedy?
Oh yeah, so I was accepted at the Conservatoire d'Art Dramatique in the 16th district of Paris. It was a breath of fresh air, an amazing school where everything seemed possible. Once again, I was very lucky. Since the year I got in, a new professor from Avignon just started teaching there. I think if I had been in a Parisian drama school with a Parisian teacher right from the start, I would have felt less free. I loved and always loved Racine. I loved working on all the authors. We were taught fencing. We did a lot of activities. That was also a breath of fresh air. After the deep research and intellectual work Sciences Po had provided to me, it was amazing to discover another type of intellectual work. Learning the drama texts and then questioning yourself. Acting is not just about learning the script and then showing up on stage. There's a whole research, a reflection on its characters, being allowed to let your imagination run wild and be in something less about productivity was pleasing. I was still working a full-time job on the side, but
no rest allowed.
Yeah, I know. And it's strange because I think resting is very important. In the end, the period I rested the most was when I was traveling in Australia. I'm very nostalgic about that time. Of having long periods where you can let your brain on some sort of fallow period. I think if everything today is going very fast and everything comes to me very fast, it's precisely because there were those long periods when I was in limbo. If I hadn't lived them, the very intense period I am in now wouldn't exist. I've got to admit that I'm looking forward to reading other things than utilitarian essays. I'm currently working on my postgraduate dissertation, and I don't have time to read novels. I love Dorothy Parker, and usually I read her poems over and over just for the pleasure of it. I can't do it anymore. I miss not being in a place where you always have something to produce, because that's also how reflection comes to you.
La comédie, c'est aussi, vous parlez beaucoup de l'intellect, mais c'est aussi une histoire de corps.
But comedy is also about the body, and you used to be a burlesque performer, and that's an important part of your body positivity activism. What can burlesque bring to a woman?
C'est un milieu qui vous a apporté quoi, le burlesque?
Well, let's say burlesque was also linked to the fact that I was a drawing model for years, so...
In art schools, right?
Yes, in art schools. It was a real tool that allowed me to start a reconciliation with my body. It allowed me to take control over this hypersexual fetishization that Marie-Julie Chalut, who's also a comedian, talks about in Speak Up. She also says that Black women's bodies are not valued as precious. Modeling for art schools made my body precious. And I like the fact that a drawing is always about the person who draws rather than the person that is drawn. There's a book that I like a lot that's about dancers, but it also applies to comedians. It's a book by Pierre Legendre titled La passion d'être un autre, which means the passion of being someone else. I really loved that about acting, and I try to recreate that through burlesque. The fact that you can become someone else, take on different bodies. I also acted in some commedia dell'arte pieces, which is so liberating. Every commedia dell'arte character is about the body. That was very liberating for me. And it's so much fun. Comedy is a game. At least I had great fun doing it. And burlesque is a lot of fun as well. And there's this whole game of interaction with the audience that I appreciate so much. The first play I ever saw was The Marriage of Figaro, with a very contemporary staging. It was at the TNP in Villeurbanne. When the trial scene comes, they would select people from the audience, and it became totally hectic with Beastie Boys music. At that time, I thought theater was the old dusty broadcasted plays I used to watch on national television.
With the four knocks and everything.
That's it. And the first time I get to see a play in a big Lyon theater, I discovered that thing completely. With people jumping around, music I listened to. That's what theater was for me, an immense freedom. You can do everything, get on a stage and then come up to the audience. Burlesque is the same. It's all about interaction with the audience. It's not only about taking your clothes off. The audience has to react.
It's slightly provocative, right?
Yes, but not that much because the public is already committed to the cause. You don't perform burlesque in like an office where it would be obviously a bit...
Keep your clothes on, please.
I'm going to do a happening in Lauren Bastide's podcast by taking my clothes off. No, it's not really about provocation. Even if I was more on the neo-burlesque type of scene. We can also add a lot of positive things to it. One of my favorite acts that I'll get back to as soon as I have 20 minutes is a reverse. I start naked, and then I put my dominatrix clothing back on. And the music is from Brigitte Fontaine, who sings « Je suis une fanfreluche, une petite chose en peluche. I am a frill, a little plushy thing. » I loved it. It's all about telling a story in 3 minutes and 30 seconds by taking off or putting on clothes. There are loads of different narratives possible, and that's what I love about it. And the fact that you can choose what you want to do with your body. Rebecca Chaillon, who's also a comedian interviewed in my movie, does that. She was the first black mermaid I ever saw, and I was completely dazzled. She just wraps her legs in plastic film, throws glitter on it, jumps on a podium and starts acting like a mermaid. Burlesque is also about makeup, which can also be found in drag queen performances. The use of makeup can also be so liberating for some people, especially in the idea of trying to escape the limits applied to the black woman's bodies. Asking yourself, what can I do beyond it?
Alors, on va revenir à l'esprit, maintenant qu'on était sur le corps.
Now that we've talked about the body, let's go back to your mind. 2 years ago, you wrote the foreword of the French edition of Bell Hooks' essay, Ain't I a Woman?, a seminal work for black feminism. Would you agree to read the book's first 2 paragraphs of introduction?
Yes, of course.
Great, it's a great introduction.
At a time in American history when black women in every area of the country might have joined together to demand social equality for women, and a recognition of the impact of sexism on our social status, we were, by and large, silent. Our silence was not merely a reaction against white women liberationists or a gesture of solidarity with black male patriarchs. It was the silence of the oppressed, that profound silence engendered by resignation and acceptance of one's lot. Contemporary black women could not join together to fight for women's rights because we did not see womanhood as an important aspect of our identity. Racist, sexist socialization had conditioned us to devalue our femaleness and to regard race as the only relevant label of identification. In other words, we were asked to deny a part of ourselves. And we did. Consequently, when the women's movement raised the issue of sexist oppression, we argued that sexism was insignificant in light of the harsher, more brutal reality of racism. We were afraid to acknowledge that sexism could be just as oppressive as racism. We clung to the hope that liberation from racial oppression would be all that was necessary for us to be free. We were a new generation of black women who had been taught to submit, to accept sexual inferiority, and to be silent.
You say you had an epiphany when you understood that your movie, Speak Up, was actually addressed to the 15-year-old woman you were. What hadn't been told to that young woman?
Everything.
Nobody told her to read bell hooks. It wasn't even translated in French yet.
Exactly. Those sexual projections were a very violent part of my teenage years. I wasn't warned about that common fetishization that men as old as my father would break at the bus stop every morning. So violently frightening. I lived in the countryside, so I was often alone in my alley, and men in their cars would stop all the time, and you just wished that they wouldn't actually get out of their cars and drag us inside or something. Those are stories we talked about a lot with the girls interviewed in my movie.
Many things surprised me in that movie, although I read a lot on the subject. The very precocious sexualization of black teenagers, for instance. I didn't realize it was that bad.
Oh yeah, it's very significant. My mother could see that something was wrong. No matter how hard I wanted to be normal, I never had any boyfriends. One day I was 15 or 16 years old. My parents asked me very gently, "You know, Amandine, if you told us you were a lesbian, we would love you just as much, you know." I was so offended, I was like, it's not because nobody wants to go out with me that I'm necessarily gay. Then I came back a few years later do you guys remember that story about girls and stuff? Well, you guys might have been right. But yeah, I remember my mother being very disturbed by men who would follow me at the supermarket or stare at me for a very long time. They couldn't imagine the white woman standing next to me was my mother. So they would even allow themselves anything in front of her. They were twice my age. It was super uneasy. It was something I wished I could have been warned about. Girls who grew up in Afro families might have been more than me. Still, it is complicated. How can you start this conversation with your children who start becoming sexually active by warning them, you are going to be fetishized? That's what Fanny talks about at the end of the movie. It raises a question of, when? Is it too early? Should we try our best to preserve our teenage girls' innocence and naivety? Should we come up to them and say, beware, you are going to be mistaken with a sexual object, told you are a panther, feline, all that when they aren't even sexually active yet? It's all about preventing. But how?
Your movie also tackles black women mental health. As a black woman, you're not allowed to go through depression.
Yes, it's part of the challenges we face. When you are constantly attacked from the outside, you have a tendency to reconstruct your pride around stereotypical things. I remember reading something in a women's magazine. Two black sisters were saying, part of the benefits of being black is that you always feel energetic and happy. It is just not possible for us to take in everything. It's a way to dehumanize us. Of course, we aren't always happy. There is a psychological and mental cost to this societal violence, and it needs to be discussed. But it is very often denied and shameful in Afro communities. If you're looking to talk about mental health issues, you better hold on for the ride. But the stakes are high. And it's the same for everything. When you start speaking up, you start hearing more and more stories. There is not a single Black person who hasn't told me, that's true. I have an aunt, a brother, a whatever who... It's not because something is not talked about that it doesn't exist. And there is also the challenge linked to the majority group, creating Black characters like Bambula who are always funny, happy. That's why I couldn't stand the movie The Untouchables. It was yet again a representation of a tall, smiley Black man.
Like in that movie with Black actor Omar Sy taking care of a disabled person in an overly joyful way.
Yeah. And I mean, those characters lack depth, complexity. The actress Fermine Richard, for example, she is always locked up in specific characters who are unidimensional, who are either nice, funny, naive, or even sometimes a bit dumb. But we are as complex as the rest of humanity. In our communities, too, there are manipulators and people who are constantly depressed. We are not uniformly happy, joyful. And it is something Fanny from the movie always talks about, that joy is very political. It's some sort of resistance. Being constantly under attack and insisting on staying joyful is a form of resistance. It says, no matter what you do to me, I will stay gracious. I will laugh loud. I will take some space. You just wish I would stay quiet and disappear.
It's
resisting.
Exactly. And since it is something that is very rarely thought or thematically structured that way, what interests me is to put an end to taboos and denial. So yes, it's a challenge.
There is another aspect of identity that is denied to Black women, which is homosexuality. One of the women even says this incredible sentence, "I thought I was all alone."
Well, yeah, because I mean, who can name famous French Black women without having to give it some thought? And if you add queer, well, there isn't any. Today there is Shirley Soignon, who is out, but to my knowledge, she is the only female Black public figure who did her coming out. It's not a lot. We're in 2017 now.
En fait, ce qui m'intéressait, c'est de la façon dont vous avez suscité la
The way you triggered words from those women is amazing. You can really feel such authenticity. How did you achieve this, technically?
Comment ça s'est produit?
That's why I say the blog is important. Because I put myself in a dangerous position and because I try to be as clear as possible on where I am standing and on a power relationship level. People can trust me. I am usually the same in real life than on social media, even if I try to maintain some privacy. Even if the personal is political, I sometimes end up saying so much about my personal life in the public space because of this desire to avoid creating a norm. Plus, this project is based on my life. There isn't a single thing I asked the girls that I haven't done myself. That's how it works, reciprocity. In France, in comparison to North America, we are not very ethical when it comes to research. I am completing a master's thesis, and I have to go through a very binding ethical procedure, but it's a very good thing. I have to say what the benefits for the interviewee will be, hand them out a form where my whole research program is explained, and I give them the possibility to withdraw themselves if they wish to, without ever having to explain why. It's not the case with the movie because it's a creative work, but yeah, that's my rule. And it empowers them.
Like some kind of contract?
Exactly. And that is something I tend to criticize about documentary making. People who do war reporting, sociologists, they are always in an overhanging relationship, not only through their storytelling, but regarding what's at stake. What does it mean for your career when you are a white person from the upper middle class who interviews drug addicts in the ghetto? If those persons aren't happy with the picture you painted of them, if they have retrospective claims, how can they attack you? They don't have the power to turn their backs on you. I always quote the Pinson Charlot as an example because to me, they are almost the only sociologists in France who work on the rich and mighty. Because obviously, when you write something about company directors or wealthy families, those are the people who have the financial power to drag you to court. They have the ability to crush your career. Only then you are putting yourself in danger as a researcher. Your work becomes political. I really question myself about people who keep focusing their work on those who are at the bottom, who don't have the resources to hold them accountable. In Speak Up, we are in a horizontal relationship because we are all Black women. I don't question them on esoteric subjects. I question them on our common experiences as Black women. And the girls know where to find me. They know where I live. They can call me out on social media. I cannot do anything I want.
There's an obvious solidarity between you girls. At one of the first screenings of the movie in Saint-Denis in December, I felt a huge emotional rush when I saw all of you holding hands on the stage.
Yes, of course. That's how I built this project, which started 3 years ago. It was important for me to create a group. Also, we had trouble funding the movie, which brought us closer together. Plus, the movie was written upstream. I was able to hand them out the questionnaire from the very moment I recruited them. I presented them the themes, and we agreed on them through discussion. Were they okay with it? I wanted them to be comfortable with the fact that there was going to be some nudity. I knew from the start that I was going to film burlesque performance, that they were going to talk about religion. Not everyone was comfortable with that fact. I met 45 people in it, and it ended up being a group of 24 girls. I myself excluded very few people, and I only excluded them because I was going to ask from them a public speech, and I could feel they were vulnerable. I never doubted the movie would be successful, and I wasn't sure they were ready for the tidal wave that was coming. Those are the only persons I didn't pick. The others chose not to be a part of the movie. So when I had my final group of 24 girls, I started organizing dinners at home so they could meet each other. I am a huge admirer of Ella Baker. We tend to forget the fact that it was women like her, women from the Black church and religious organizations, who helped the civil rights movement develop by handling the whole organizational aspect of it, organizing dinners, educating the children, and then men picked up the microphones and preached and all that. But the biggest part of the job, which consisted of mobilizing people to march, was done by women. Ella Baker was one of them. And she used to say, strong people don't need strong leaders. I really believe in that. My goal, my job, is to give people tools so they can start doing their thing. I organized dinners at my house like a conversation, so they could meet and know that if ever something turned out wrong for them and I wasn't available, they would know who to call to talk about it.
Moreover, they are answering to each other in the movie.
Of course, and I could not have done that with girls who didn't know each other in real life. It would have been weird. The conversations they were having on screen are conversations they actually had together. So it was very important for me to build a group that wasn't artificial. We hung out together for a whole year, so it's no surprise that they really confided in me during the interviews. We already have a relationship. But maybe I won't proceed the same way for the second movie, because it is quite draining for me to create a link that is on the verge of friendship and aid relationship. And also because I remain the director. I'm the one who's creating a work of art, which is completely mine, and in the end, I'm the one who ends up making choices and making decisions. I lend them as much power as I can, but in the end, I'm the boss.
You kept control.
Yeah, but it all ended very well. They are happy, I think. Anyway, for the moment, everyone is happy. But it's clear that in order to obtain this quality of expression, there needs to be a true relationship behind it. Otherwise, it just won't work.
Faut le redire, je pense, parce que le film donc, va sortir en salle à l'automne prochain, ce qui n'était pas du tout évident encore en décembre quand je l'ai vu à Saint-Denis. Donc déjà,
It is great cinema. It moves, it provokes, it opens up to the world. It's also very political. When I saw it in December, people were literally applauding and laughing during the screening. It was the first time I ever saw this. You organized countless screenings all over France, but also in Berlin, in Europe. What do you feel when you witness the audience greeting your movie in such a way?
Quand vous voyez l'accueil que le public fait à vos films, vous avez fait beaucoup de projections dans toute la France. Vous allez partir bientôt, je crois, à Berlin, en Europe.
The movie is booked for a screening in London and then in Montreal. Also, we did the Sputnik in Geneva and Venice, Berlin.
So it really is the tidal wave you are expecting.
Yes.
How do you feel during the screenings of Speak Up?
Pendant les projections, oui, c'est chouette. Moi,
It's great, especially the one in Saint-Denis. I tend to go outside of the screening room and listen by the door for 15 minutes, checking if people are reacting or not. It's interesting to analyze the different reactions of different types of audiences. When there is a majority of white people in the room, there's always this double reaction. White people aren't quite sure they are allowed to laugh, and the racialized persons don't want to be the only ones laughing. If there's a majority of white people in the room, it generally takes 15 minutes for them to laugh and react. If the majority is racialized, it takes a very little amount of time. I was often surprised because for some parts of the movie, I expected people to laugh. But for some, I was really surprised by the audience reaction. It's a good way to test public opinion on a general basis.
Il y a des choses, par exemple, quand on est dans les milieux universitaires ou militants qui nous semblent acquises. Et puis, en fait,
in academic or activist circles, a lot of things seem acquired to us. But when you bring those concepts to a rather more general space, a lot of people are in complete discovery. The sequence where a girl tells about her boss asking her if she feels nostalgic about slavery gets the audience every time. The whole room goes, "What? No!" That's very funny. So yeah, I'm happy. That's why I do what I do. But the real question is, will it work once the movie is officially out in movie theaters? I did some math. It is said that there are 5 million black persons in France. Half of them are black women, which means 2.5 million. If 10% of them go to see this movie, it should make at least $250,000 at the box office. That would make me happy. Plus, there aren't only black people who are going to see it, but that's my main target. And it's true that if I don't get to it, I won't be happy at all.
Today you live in Montreal, in Canada. What have you found there that doesn't exist here in France?
Calm. It's a daily life in which I don't have to live through countless racial microaggressions. I don't get followed at the supermarket. I am greeted every time I enter a shop. People queue to take the bus. It may seem anecdotic, but all those daily exactions that are consistent with Parisian life, in which we need to elbow our way in and push each other, don't exist. And then there are tiny squirrels everywhere. They end up being irritating when you end up living with them and they eat your garbage and everything. But they remain cute, jumping from one tree to another. I have an office in front of a window, which is in front of trees, where I can see the squirrels. And then there is snow. Snow makes everything quiet. I live in a very quiet street. Last winter, it was great on a creative level, thanks to that silence, that calm. There isn't any pollution, so I can go and circle my little block whenever I have spent too much time locked inside. There are parks everywhere, greenery. A quality of life I was deprived of when I was living in the suburban area of Paris. So yeah, a total absence of aggressions and an acknowledgement of my work. In a year and a half in Canada, I earned more money giving lectures than I did during the last 8 or 9 years in Paris.
Okay, it's time for this super weird question. I'm really sorry, but I have to ask you. How do you get along with your uterus, Amandine Gay?
With my uterus? It's a very good question. I was precisely telling myself that while I have friends who work on the subject with performances, stuff like that, And I myself, being very interested in adoption and reproductive rights, I know very little about it. I'm part of those people who, ever since their biology classes in 5th grade,
Stopped hearing about it.
yeah, and I think it's a bit of shame. I wish I knew him better. As far as I know, the first woman to do it was Annie Sprinkle, who did performances with a, what's it called again? That horrible thing used to open it up.
Oh yeah, vaginal speculum.
With a vaginal speculum. The performance consisted in her opening her vagina up and allowing people to come by and watch her uterus. I have friends who organize similar happenings, who are into witchy things. And maybe one day I'll attend one, but because it's true that I never really looked at it, checked that it functioned, and I would like that. So yeah, no particular relationship to my uterus, but
You have the desire to meet it.
I would be very pleased to meet it. I'll tell you how far I've come next time.
Okay, so there's another question I ask all of my guests, but you already partially answered it. Do you have access to your room of one's own?
À Montréal, oui.
In Montreal, yes, and it's so important. That's a big deal for me. If we move in somewhere, I need a desk and a closed room where to work.
Il me faut un bureau, enfin, il me faut une pièce fermée pour travailler.
And in your daily life, are you able to invest this area?
Yes, but that's the problem with living between two spaces. It's more difficult to have that space when I come back to France in Saint-Denis. But I've always made that room for me. If not an actual room, there's always a desk that is mine, where everything is the way I like it and nobody should touch anything. But if I can have a room, it's even better.
What does la poudre mean to you?
To me, it's the powder that makes everything blow up, or the powder of escampette, as we say in French, that I took when I fled to Montreal.
Thanks a lot, Amandine.
Thank you for inviting me, Lauren.
Thank you to Amandine Gay for speaking up in La Poudre. Nouvelles Écoutes is the executive producer of La Poudre, a podcast produced by Aurore Meyer-Mailleux, prepared and recorded by Zisla Tortello, and mixed by Laurie Galigani. The English dubbing is made by l'Arrière-Boutique Studio. The signature tune is an audio sample from the song L'Appétit by Bonnie Banane. If you like the podcast, bless it with stars, preferably 5 of them, on Apple Podcasts. You can join us on social media. La Poudre is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also follow me on my social media. I go by Lorraine Bastide, and I post in English on Instagram. If you want to hear about other exciting podcasts produced by Nouvelles Écoutes, please visit our website, where you can also subscribe to La Poudre newsletter. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. This episode of La Poudre was recorded in a room of the Hôtel Grand Amour, one of the coziest, sexiest, and coolest hotels in Paris. I cannot thank them enough for their ongoing support starting right from La Poudre's very first season. If you book a room with the code La Poudre at the Hôtel Grand Amour, you'll get a 10% reduction on your reservation. You're welcome.